Hi, everyone. Last night, I had an incredible opportunity to sit down across from Senator Ron Johnson, who has gone from a Tea Party stalwart to one of the leaders of the Make America Healthy Again movement. What's so interesting about the opportunity that I got, thanks to the Conservative Partnership Institute, to spend time with Senator Johnson at this live event full of staffers from Capitol Hill and all kinds of interesting people, was that it happened on the 5 year anniversary this week is the 5 year anniversary, you may have heard, of COVID being declared a public health emergency here in the United States. And that was a pivotal moment for Senator Johnson. The pandemic was a pivotal moment for Senator Johnson, who actually came from plastics manufacturing before he was elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Wisconsin in 2010 on almost a proto MAGA ticket, talking about bringing manufacturing back to Wisconsin and jobs being lost overseas. He's a really, really fascinating person to interview on these subjects. And just to have the opportunity to sort of walk through the last 5 years with him, but also focus on how the Make America Healthy Again movement, one of the most unorthodox political constituencies that has ever sort of been uh, attached to the Republican Party, is there are a lot of things happening right now on Capitol Hill in particular, and here in Washington D.C. that lifelong Democrat Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been tapped to be the Health and Human Services Secretary for a Republican president's administration. Jay Bhattacharya will likely be confirmed very soon. There's some really, really interesting and strange stuff happening here in Washington. So to sort of give a progress report on MAHA coming to D.C. and taking the reins of power from Senator Johnson was a really interesting conversation, a really newsy conversation too, as there's a shutdown looming for Democrats. So I hope you enjoy it. It was a pleasure to get to include one question from our premium subscribers over at undercurrents.tv. Thank you for sending your questions in. This one was really interesting, so make sure to stay tuned for that. And you can get a subscription to the premium content over at undercurrents.tv for $1 for your first month. Subscribe wherever you are downloading your podcast. Subscribe on YouTube. We appreciate it. You make content like this possible for us. So enjoy the conversation. Okay, sounds good. You'll notice that we have Wisconsin beers on the table, and that is because I'm so pleased to be joined by Senator Johnson from my home state of Wisconsin. Just want to thank the senator, of course, and thank CPI, the Conservative Partnership Institute, for hosting us. This is a really, I think, important week because you've probably seen a lot of people reflecting on the 5 year anniversary of COVID being declared a public health emergency. So we have a lot to discuss with the senator. Just as a quick introduction, I'm Emily Jashinsky. I am the host of a show called Undercurrents. So welcome to all of our subscribers over at undercurrents.tv. We're normally in Unheard's DC bureau, but today we're here in this wonderful location. And I just wanted to thank the senator first off for being here and for all his advocacy on behalf of the health of Americans.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, Senator. My first question is about the MAHA movement's power here in Washington. Secretary Kennedy, it's crazy to even say that. It's amazing to even say that. Hosted the first MAHA Commission roundtable just yesterday. It looked like a big success. Jay Bhattacharya appears to be headed for confirmation at NIH. Also an amazing thing to be able to say, along with Marty Makary at FDA. On the other hand, though, there was the dust up with Weldon here in Washington just over the course of the last 24 hours. Dave Weldon was RFK Jr.'s pick for that role. Here's what a CNN medical analyst said, quote, "I think the withdrawal of Weldon is a tacit acknowledgement that RFK Jr. is in trouble. Weldon was RFK's pick." So I wanted to start off, Senator Johnson, just asking if you could give us a progress report on MAHA's first 50 days.
Well, I would say the opposition to RFK Jr. is alive and well, okay? They would have liked to have defeated his nomination, but they couldn't.
Right.
Because Americans want to know what's causing this explosion in chronic illness. Americans actually do want to know what is causing autism. And literally for decades, we haven't even been able to ask the question. Mm-hmm. Anybody who does gets vilified. They do everything they can to destroy those individuals. But listen, I give President Trump and Bobby Kennedy all the credit for moving this forward. I mean, had it not been for Bobby recognizing that he wasn't going to win the presidency, because it's very difficult with 30 parties. It's even more difficult when you have the party of really his family name,
Mm.
not even allowing you to run in a primary, the party of democracy, right? So, he finally realized it was futile, the way the legacy media wouldn't even put him, give him any airtime whatsoever. The only airtime he got was pretty much on conservative outlets.
Mm-hmm.
And he resonated with conservative audiences. And so the fact that he decided to suspend his campaign and join forces with President Trump, and President Trump welcomed him. Two individuals that obviously have different ideas in different areas politically, but they absolutely both wanted to come to, develop the knowledge of what is causing chronic illness. They wanted to find out what's causing autism. They wanted to address this problem. And so they put their political differences aside, focused on an area of agreement. And in doing that, not only demonstrated how do you solve a problem, but also how do you take the first step in healing this horribly divided nation? How do you heal and unify it? And so I give them great credit, and that's, but it's the public support for what they both want to do that made this possible. But again, the fact that they were able to defeat the Weldon nomination, it's really tragedy, because I spoke with the doctor. He's got a very open mind. He's certainly not anti-vax. He vaccinates his patients. Okay. Mm-hmm. He just has some questions, like, maybe, just maybe, 85 doses on the childhood schedule, vaccines given in three to six different vaccines at the same time to very young infants whose immune systems are just developing. That might be a problem, but we can't even ask the question. So again, I give Donald Trump and Bobby Kennedy all the credit for taking really a giant leap forward in terms of addressing this problem, but also demonstrating how we're going to heal and unify this very divided nation.
It seems to me like Dr. Weldon doesn't even know exactly what happened when the White House pulled his nomination. He said sort of that big pharma may have had something to do with it. He said it's the concern of many people is that big pharma, quote, was behind this, which is probably true in a statement today. Do you know if pressure from big pharma had anything to do with it?
No, but I think you can pretty well assume that. Again, they couldn't bring down Bobby Kennedy because what he was doing is so politically popular in completely nonpartisan fashion. So, Republican senators couldn't vote against him, even those that might have wanted to. But Pharma doesn't go quiet in the night, so they got their scalp. And unfortunately, it was Dr. Weldon.
Have you ever been the victim of a data breach? I know I have, recently actually, and let me tell you, it's infuriating. It's bad enough that big companies are careless with our personal information, but what really gets me, they never seem to face any real consequences for it. Meanwhile, no one is putting in any effort to actually protect our privacy from American companies that profit off of our data. That's why I don't leave my online security up to chance. I use Aura, today's sponsor, to keep my information safe. Because let's be honest, no one else is going to do it for us. Aura does the hard work for me. First, they track down data brokers who are selling my personal information and submit opt-out requests on my behalf. Give it a few weeks, and I actually stop seeing my info pop up in search results, which means less spam, fewer robocalls, and more control over my data. Aura also monitors the dark web around the clock and alerts me if my personal details, like passwords or social security numbers, are floating around where they shouldn't be. And if someone tries to use my information to access my bank or credit accounts, Aura lets me know fast so I can take action before any damage is done. And here's some serious peace of mind. Aura offers up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, so if the worst happens, I'm covered. Oh, and did I mention, Aura includes a VPN with 100 plus virtual locations, so whether I'm working remotely or just trying to keep my browsing private, I know my connection is secure. Does your current VPN offer all of this? I didn't think so. Stop leaving yourself vulnerable to data breaches and data brokers. Go to aura.com/undercurrents to try Aura free for 14 days. That's enough time to find out just how much of your personal information is already exposed and take the first step to locking it down. Stay safe out there.
Well, and even just going back a little bit, I was mentioning before we started that I went back and watched some of your ads from your original campaign in 2010, which I lived in Wisconsin at the time. So I remember seeing on TV, and there was, to me, such an overlap with what we hear now from Doge. And there's all kinds of questions about how MAHA is maybe downstream of these questions about sometimes we have too many regulations, sometimes we have not enough regulation. But I wanted to just see if you could reflect for a moment on how maybe there is a point A being the Tea Party to point B now with Doge. Do you see that connection from those two epics?
Yeah, I think so. It's part and parcel of the same movement. From my standpoint, the underlying uh, effort of the Tea Party was, preserving freedom. And those of us who value freedom realize, our founders were geniuses. They realized, we're men and women, we're imperfect. If you don't want to live in chaos and anarchy, you have to have some form of government. But government is not created to solve our problems. Government is a necessary evil, and it's really something more to fear and needs to be limited, which is why they wrote this brilliant constitution that in theory was going to have three co-equal branches of government, all three branches jealously guarding their own constitutional authority, not leaping outside the constraints of the enumerated powers. But that's kind of gone by the wayside. And now as government grows, our freedoms necessarily recede. So that's really what I think the Tea Party recognizes as we start producing $1 trillion a year deficit. I mean, those are the good old days. When I ran literally in parades, I would shout, "We're mortgaging our children's future. It's wrong. It's immoral. It's got to stop. Freedom." That was my chant.
Sounds like a great parade.
And I got elected. But we were $14 trillion in debt. Now we're 36.4, and no one in sight. I will report. We came back from a meeting with the Senate Finance Committee Republicans and President Trump, in a very positive meeting. I mean, he is dedicated to balancing the budget. Now he's looking at different forms of revenue, whether it's tariffs, whether it's his gold card, which quite honestly is a brilliant idea, combined with returning to a reasonable pre-pandemic level of spending. And that'll be kind of the combination of factors that I think we've got a real shot at it. So I'm encouraged by that. I could not be happier with how swift and how bold and how decisive he is acting to honor the promises he made to the American public, secure the border, end this wokeism throughout government and in our university systems, protect our girls and our women from biological males invading their sports and their bathrooms and their locker rooms and their showers. Okay.
Controversial.
So it shouldn't be. It's only controversial in the legacy media and with, I guess the crazies who've embraced all that. Okay. But, the vast majority of Americans are really supporting what President Trump is trying to do here. So I'm encouraged, but there's no doubt about it. There's pretty much a direct line from the Tea Party movement to, the MAGA movement and now the MAHA movement. This is all about, we don't trust government. We recognize it is corrupt. It is grotesquely dysfunctional and inefficient. That's what Elon Musk is, laying out for the American public to see, is just how grossly dysfunctional and inefficient, and how much of our hard-earned tax money or the money we're borrowing that's mortgaging our children's future, how poorly the government, spends those funds. So again, that's what I think most people support, what Elon Musk is doing, even though the press is doing everything they can to create fear of Elon Musk. What blows my mind is, the drumbeat is, what he said, unelected, some with conflict of interest. What about the unelected bureaucrats that are completely unaccountable, that are the deep state, that do not provide the radical transparency that Bobby Kennedy is absolutely dedicated to provide as Secretary of HHS? By the way, he's running into roadblocks right off the bat. This is not going to be easy. I just want to caution everybody. This isn't, Trump didn't take over. Now, it's amazing how much he's accomplished very short term, but extracting information, extracting truth, from the deep state is not going to be easy. They are not going to go, like the big pharma. They're not going to go quietly into the night.
One of the things I took away from the Tea Party era, and probably a lot of us in this room took away from the Tea Party era, was this total appetite among average conservatives, Republican voters, for their lawmakers, their elected officials, to absolutely stick it to the political establishment here in Washington. And I'm sort of fascinated, and I'm curious for your thoughts on how Democrats are now handling their own shutdown dilemma. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand was reportedly yelling so loudly today that you could hear her through a wooden door in the Capitol. I think that was according to Punch Bowl, right? But do you sense that they are starting to finally pick up that the mood of the country is completely fed up with the Hillary Clintons, the Joe Bidens, and the Kamala Harrises, or are they still completely sort of aloof to that point?
I think most of them are totally clueless. They are so dedicated to this wokeness and their radical left ideology. And they've whipped up their base. I mean, they've been lying to their base for decades, and so their base is now demanding that they show fealty to this ideology. And so we're hearing senators are they are, if they're doing telephone town halls, they're getting thousands of people on there demanding that they dig their heels in on the CR. I mean, understand how absurd it is, by the way. A continuing resolution just continues spending for the priorities of the previous fiscal year. Let's see who signed that into law, who passed that. That'd be Joe Biden and Democrats in the Senate. That's their spending plan. I voted against it. I didn't like it. Okay, but I also do not like government shutdowns, which is why I've been promoting Preventing Government Shutdown Act ever since I was chairman of Homeland Security. It's a better way than incurring the cost of a shutdown. So you have these Democrats who, for every one of these shutdown battles, have always blamed Republicans for it because they've had the media backing them, and just talking, oh, we can't do a shutdown. This is horrible. People are going to die. All of a sudden, they're going to take us to the brink. They're going to shut the government down. Now, the question is, will the legacy media hold them accountable? Because obviously the House passed this. It's a pretty clean CR. And so understand, we're already halfway through the year on a CR. This is the second half of the year. We've tweaked $900 billion worth of spending by a few billion for defense, reduced a few $1 billion for programs that are kind of one-time spending. By and large, that's kind of what we're talking about. It's basically 2024 spending, and they're going to vote no. And they're going to, and my guess is the legacy media will back them up. There's some outrageous thing. They'll come up with something and justify their voting no and shutting down the government. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Are you conflicted at all on the CR, or is it? I mean, you're a
no. Again, I have been opposed to shutdowns, and because we did not take care of fiscal 2025 funding, first of all, before the fiscal year, which is what we're supposed to do. But certainly not before President Trump came into office. I mean, I knew Democrats aren't going to cooperate with us at all. So I've been predicting for quite some time the only way we're going to fund 2025 is by CRs, whether it's a week at a time, whether it's 30 days at a time, or whether it's a year. Now, the House has chosen to do it for a year, try and plus up defense a little bit, give President the flexibility. It's kind of amazing. If I were in the White House, okay, and I would be going, make our day, shut it down. We'll manage this just fine. They're kind of, I think from the president's standpoint, do it either way, because you're not going to shut down the vast majority of the government. And the good news for the American public, a shutdown under a Republican president will make it as painless as possible. A shutdown on a Democrat president, because the press is blaming the Republicans, they make it as painful as possible for the public. So the Democrats just might find that the American people aren't going to mind a shutdown at all, because it's less than 10% of the government that actually does shut down. Now, I'm going to feel really bad for government employees who are deemed essential and have to work and still don't get paid. But we can come back by unanimous consent and say, let's pay the Coast Guard. Let's pay Customs and Border Protection. Let's protect these people, okay? Because of Democrats, obstinance. But again, I don't know if we have a shutdown. I guess it's not going to last very long, because I don't see how the Democrats can really sustain it.
Yeah, I'm curious how they take that lesson from all of this, hearing from their base and everything. Speaking of that, in the Tea Party era, in 2012, you wrote, quote, "Federal spending is the visible portion of government fat." And this is actually so perfect for MAHA, by the way, even the way you illustrate this. "Federal regulations are the less visible plaque clogging the arteries of our economy." I agreed with that then. I agree with it now, and I imagine you do too. I wanted to ask, though, how you think about federal regulations and the economy, given that MAHA is fiercely critical of corporate capture that sometimes involves bad regulation, but can also sometimes involve under-regulation. So how do you balance that now?
So you have to recognize that, again, we're not angels. I mean, there's some really bad people in the world. And so you need something trying to prevent that badness, trying to protect the public. So again, we need federal health agencies. We need some kind of regulator to ensure that what's in drugs is what the drugs say is in it, that the drugs are as safe as possible, that we have honest scientific research and honest studies. Right now, we don't have that because of the corporate capture, because government's been funded and you've had one evil person, Anthony Fauci, doling out tens of billions of dollars of loans for decades. Okay, so Anthony Fauci got the results he wanted, for example, on remdesivir. I mean, the World Health Organization recommended against using remdesivir. I think remdesivir killed people. They had knocked out their kidneys. It was like the worst thing you probably could have done for somebody in the hospital, but that became the standard of care. And unfortunately, our doctors are just following a protocol, and they can administer something that they might even in the back of their minds think, I may be killing my patients here, but I'm not going to get in trouble for it because this is what I'm being told to do. Anthony Fauci said, this is the way. Well, put about $3,500 in the pocket of Big Pharma for every course of treatment. So no, I mean, there is real corruption. I quite honestly don't even know what question I was answering for you. Over-regulation. So we need some level of regulation, but it has to be honest. I think the first task of Bobby Kennedy is you have to restore integrity to science. It's not going to be easy, but also recognize, as opposed to Anthony Fauci, who claimed he was science, what science is skepticism. That's why it's so tragic that Bill Weldon, David Weldon, Dr. Weldon, he was a skeptic. He wanted to see prove it to me. Bobby Kennedy's a skeptic. He's not going to go half-cocked and just, hey, this is what I believe, so we're going to institute this. He's going to make sure that his actions are guided by real science. And from my standpoint, real science is going to be having everybody at the table. So as we move down the path in terms of, what's in our food, I want agriculture there. I want big food processing. I want the MAHA movement. I want the nutritionists. I want everybody at the table because science isn't always black and white. It probably rarely is. Particularly when you're talking something as complex as the human body and as varied as the human body and our reaction to different chemicals and ingredients, that type of thing. So again, this is not going to be an easy task, but there's an approach to doing it. But right now, government funding promoted by or funded by corrupt individuals, captured by, I hate because I'm a private sector guy. I hate talking about corporate interests. Right. That's what we're down to now. I mean, it's just true. I don't have a problem with big business until they use their power to corrupt the process to the detriment of their competitors, the detriment of the public. And again, that's probably Lord Acton, probably one of the most brilliant statements ever is that power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, what is government? I mean, at its core, government is power. And so it will be corrupted, which is why our founders realized, let's limit it, because whatever we got is going to be corrupted to some extent. So we have to limit the harmful impact of the corruption of the government that we do need.
And so how do you view the possibility of DOGE reductions at NIH, well, actually more broadly at HHS, NIH, FDA? What do you make of how that could go?
First of all, I could not be more pleased that, again, now here Trump teamed up with Elon Musk, who I think inarguably is one of the most brilliant and accomplished and effective human beings ever to walk the face of the earth. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, whoa, this guy is unbelievable. And we've got this guy working for us for free and recruiting a bunch of other very young people to use their brilliance to go in there and first of all, mine the data that, I, as a investigating overseer, trying to conduct oversight of Congress, would never get, but he has access to it. And they're asking questions that actually I can't even believe they've never been asked before. It's like, okay, and all these checks going out of Treasury, I mean, do we code these to accounts? Do we know what this money's for? The answer is no. How we got 2 million federal employees. How many credit cards do we have out there? What, over 4 million? Are you kidding? It's like,
it's a good deal.
It's just unbelievable. So no. So what we need to do though is, he can stop at least temporarily, paying these contracts.
Mm-hmm.
But does the president really have
Right.
the empowerment power? But what we do know from the Empowerment Act is we have something called rescission. In addition to reconciliation, we have this device called rescission, where if it's generated in the White House can recommend that this spending is is rescinded, and that can be discretionary spending as well as the mandatory that we can only address during reconciliation. So, or only mandatory can be addressed during reconciliation. So we've got two ways of using just simple majority votes in both the House and the Senate. And what my recommendation was repeatedly, the White House, including just an hour ago, is let's do multiple rescission packages. As Elon Musk comes up with, 3 or 5 just outrageous example, package those with a bunch of other horrific examples of waste, fraud, and abuse that we want to rescind, and do it on a monthly basis. Let's shift that muscle memory. Let's have the public aware of the fact you just can't wait really for the next package to be outraged again, and then support our action of voting to rescind it.
I have 2 more questions before we get to the audience, so please get ready for that. I want to just ask Senator a question from one of our Undercurrents.tv subscribers, Robert Schwartz. He's curious about food stamps, which is important right now because Congress will likely take up the Farm Bill this year, which will be a fascinating process in the era of MAHA. But he asked, what criteria do the nutrition experts of the federal government use to define food? And this is really interesting because you were just talking about how big business can be just as corrupted as big government. Do you have any insight on this process? I mean, you're on the aging committee too, and I imagine this is something that weighs on a lot of seniors who are now dealing with chronic illnesses or cancers that we're increasingly learning could be linked to the food supply.
So first of all, I got to put a plug in for Senator Rick Scott. He's doing a great job as chairman of the Aging Committee, actually making it a very interesting committee and holding important hearings on important issues. Yesterday was about depression in seniors and the devastation of that. Trying to figure out where I want to go on this thing. Give me
how special interests can influence the way that the federal government ends up defining nutritious foods that can be purchased with SNAP.
Okay, yeah. So you started talking about the food stamp bill. Well, I mean, you call it the Farm Bill.
Yeah, the food stamp bill.
But it's the food stamp bill.
The welfare bill.
And part of the problem with the Farm Bill is you have the only way they can pass it is by 80% of the bill being food stamps, welfare. And unfortunately, I really don't want to have to do a grand bargain, Wisconsin dairy versus Kansas wheat versus, okay, it's just, I'd much rather have Wisconsin take care of Wisconsin dairy in our agriculture and Kansas do theirs, and far better off with just a grant program. You guys figure out how you want to do it. But we federalize it. The problem with food stamps is we've just exploded the eligibility. So it used to kind of go up and down based on, good times versus bad times. Now it's kind of stuck there at a pretty high percentage. I haven't researched it recently, but I think it reached about 15%. It used to be at 6 and then and now I think we're stuck somewhere in the 12, 13% range. So, but it's a very legitimate question. I mean, should we be funding, and I hate to say this because I love Cheetos, but I quit eating them. And donuts.
Oh, wow.
I'm actually trying to improve my diet, and you actually lose weight doing that. But no, I mean, should we, again, we want to help people who can't help themselves. We want to help people help themselves. So we're a very compassionate society, but should we literally be funding and allowing food stamps to be used for sugar pop and Cheetos and donuts and, all the kind of crap that I love to eat?
Miller Lite.
Really, we should kind of limit it to healthy whole foods that are a whole lot cheaper, and they'd be far more nutritious, and the people benefiting from food stamps would be leading a healthier lifestyle, it would cost the American public less. So to me, that just makes perfect sense. I'm sure it'll be called racist, but it's actually being concerned about the health of the people that we're trying to help.
Right. Now, you actually come from the plastics industry, and this is so interesting to me because MAHA is very concerned about microplastics, and actually people even outside of the MAHA movement are concerned about microplastics. Have you changed the way that you've seen plastics, or does your experience actually kind of shape and give you a lot of background on that?
No, listen, my eyes have been opened, and I've got a very open mind. One of the things I've said in my public events, like the last paragraph of my opening statement was, I'm amazed at the knowledge that mankind has accumulated over the millennia, and how rapidly we're adding to that knowledge base.
Mm.
But as much as we know, I would argue that what we don't know vastly exceeds what we do. So, I mean, you have to bring that level of modesty, that level of humility into any of these debates. So I've got an open mind.
Mm.
It is kind of scary when you realize we got like a credit card worth of microplastics in us. I mean, that's one of the things I've heard.
Right.
I mean, I just don't know. I mean, something's happening, but let's balance it. Something's going right too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, when they started Social Security in the 30s, the life expectancy was about 61 years old. By the way, that made Social Security a very long-term type of program because they set retirement at 65. So they extract wages for most people who would never get old enough to realize the benefits. Now life expectancy is approaching 80. Okay. It's taking a little downturn because of fentanyl overdoses, that type of thing. But, so we're making progress. We must be doing something right. But also as we age, I mean, is it quality of life? I mean, are we aging in a healthy way? I mean, you've got Alzheimer's, you've got chronic illness, you have all these other issues which are enormously expensive. And the rise in autism, we have not begun to see the societal cost of that. Because as it's risen, a lot of these young people with autism are still being taken care of by their parents. Well, I hate to break it to everybody, we all die. And so those parents will pass on, then all of a sudden those individuals, particularly the ones severely autistic, are going to have to be taken care of by the public. It's going to be enormously expensive. So that's one of the, I mean, just from the financial aspects of the cost of chronic illness. I mean, I think in hearings, I think Bobby quoted 75% of our over $4 trillion healthcare costs are treating chronic illness. And imagine how we can reduce that if we can cure chronic illness, and think of all the money we would save if we stop this, increasing rate of autism, Alzheimer's as well. So, by the way, corruption of science. So I'm just reading about a scientific study on Alzheimer's about the plaque corrupted. So we've spent billions of research over the decades going down a false rabbit hole. At least that's what people are saying. Got to take that seriously. When you corrupt science, you're causing a great deal of harm. How better could have that billions of dollars of research into Alzheimer's been used if they weren't going down a false rabbit hole produced by a fraudulent study?
How often do you talk to Secretary Kennedy and maybe likely incoming NIH Director, Dr. Bhattacharya?
Again, I don't bug them. They're really busy right now.
I think plate's full.
No, I mean, honestly, I think once they get in their job, I'll start contacting them sooner. I will say, Bobby is absolutely dedicated to radical transparency.
He's become a friend of yours, it sounds like.
But we're both hitting a wall. And it's hard to figure out who's causing that wall. I think he's got confidence in people trying to extract the information, but then there's counsels involved, lawyers involved. We got to redact this because of personal information. It's like, again, I'll just be honest with you. I'm not seeing much difference between the current administration and the Biden administration, other than I absolutely know there's a sincere dedication to be radically transparent. It's just going to take time. Again, the deep state will not give up its secrets easily.
Very interesting. And before we get to questions, I do have one more thing that I just wanted to see if you would reflect, since we are here on the 5-year anniversary. Thank you so much, AJ, of the COVID public health emergency declaration. If you could take us back, Senator, to what was going through your mind 5 years ago, right now, as we all, I think, well, maybe I shouldn't say we all, but many of us did find ourselves sort of reflexively putting our trust in Dr. Anthony Fauci and others in our government, even the president. Things went south very quickly. But can you tell us what that was like for you?
So again, we're looking at March, what was it, 13th, 10th? I'm not exactly, I think it's about March 20th when a state senator in Michigan was successfully treated with hydroxychloroquine. I think that was in the March timeframe. Up to that point, I'm looking at the PSYOPs, being undertaken by Chinese government with the moon suits, all that kind of stuff. I mean, these doctors, young, healthy, getting COVID and dying within 3 days. So,
Right.
I mean, I was as freaked out and scared as everybody else. But then you had Johnny Unitas analyze the results of the Princess Cruise, almost like a perfect little research study, right? And he was out there saying that the infection mortality rate is going to be somewhat similar to maybe a bad flu season. The Center for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford, pretty much the same conclusion. This is very early on in the process. So when I saw a potential of a treatment for it, and started hearing about other ones, quite a bit later that I heard about ivermectin, but there's budesonide. There, again, corticosteroids. I had Pierre Corey testify in May when I had Johnny Ioannidis and a bunch of other people. The purpose of that hearing literally was to try and convince people not to freak out about this. This isn't Ebola.
And that's May of 2020.
This is May of 2020.
Wow. So I mean, you sort of pivoted pretty quickly to realize something was wrong.
Well, when I heard about hydroxychloroquine, I got on the horn right away to the president of Novartis, who I heard had donated 30 million tablets of hydroxychloroquine to the national stockpile. And I want to know, what, and he was all excited about it. He's going to do, he's talking, Senator, we got about a dozen studies going. We'll have the results of these things by, April, early May. End of April, I was texting him all the time. And all of a sudden he went totally dark, end of April. I've never talked to him since. Go, what's pulling off here? We had the log jam in the stockpile. We couldn't get it out. Then you had Rick Bright sabotage hydroxychloroquine. You could only use it in clinical trial, when it wasn't going to be helpful, when somebody was already too sick, it was only good for early treatment. So again, I'm watching this, I'm living it, and it's not making any sense to me. Why aren't we talking about other treatments? Why is it just one drug right now? Okay, what is the NIH expending on this? So I held that hearing in May with Johnny Ioannidis. So he talked about the Princess Cruise. And I said, it's not Ebola, 30-40% fatality rate. It's not MERS. It's not SARS-1, 8-10%. This is going to be like a bad flu. So quit freaking out. Also had Pierre Corey for the first time talking about corticosteroids. Of course, he was vilified for it. And then about 8 weeks later, all of a sudden a study from dexamethasone out of the UK, so it works. Now they always underdosed it. They didn't use enough of it. So no, I mean, I was highly suspicious very early on, end of April, early May. And yeah, I really wish I would have been holding hearings earlier. It wasn't until after the election that I finally brought in Peter McCulloch and Harvey Risch and those guys, and they talked about hydroxychloroquine. Then we brought in Pierre Corey in December, and Gary Peters just really set him off, and his opening testimony, because Gary Peters was so rude to him, went viral, and then YouTube took it down. Then I got introduced to the vaccine injured. I was censored on my as I was watching VAERS, and confronting Francis. First of all, I confronted Francis Collins in December, asking, "What are you doing about early treatment?" I mean, this is the NIH's guidelines was do nothing, go home. Be afraid. Hope you don't turn blue so that you have to go to the hospital and they'll kill you with remdesivir and ventilator. I mean, you understand, you got put on a ventilator, 90% of people died on ventilators. So I realized early on they did it to, isolate the virus. So it's not circulating all over the place. I mean, I understand that, okay? Especially when everybody's afraid of it. But, later on when you realize that, no, most people survive. But the fact that we weren't concentrating on early treatment, I asked Francis Collins over the phone, what do you do? Oh, Senator, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on exploring all these molecules. Okay, well, send me evidence. He never did. Later on, about April of 2021, when I'm watching VAERS, and this was, a few thousand deaths. Back then, it was like 47% were occurring on the day of vaccination within 1 or 2 days. So I'm in a meeting with him, personal meeting with about 4 or 5 other senators. They're all slapping themselves in the back. Hey, we got those test kits out. And I'm going, hey, Dr. Collins, are you looking at VAERS? Are you seeing these deaths? And he said, Senator, we've attributed 6 deaths to the J&J, the clotting with the child age bearing women. So, but he said, Senator, people die. That's how callous it was. I mean, to me, it's obvious correlation, may not causation, but man, that ought to be something you ought to be concerned about. And just fast forward, and that connected me to the vaccine injured. I let them tell their stories in Milwaukee. They got vilified. We all got censored. It's sick. It's sick what happened. And I agree, Scott Atlas, who had a good article in the Wall Street Journal last week saying we need a COVID reckoning. They want to just, skate into the sunset there. And it's like, well, we had to make some tough decisions, and, but we tried to do the right thing. No, they need to be held accountable. At least it has to be exposed, which is why we need radical transparency. And why Bobby and I will work hard, and we'll eventually crack this nut. We'll eventually get that radical transparency. I just wish we already had it.
Well, thank you, Senator Johnson. We're going to move on to the actual off the record portion of this off the record conversation, and go ahead and say goodbye to everybody on the live stream because we have some fantastic audience questions to get to. So we did get to continue the conversation a little bit with the cameras off and had a really good discussion where the people in the room got to ask their own questions, mostly about the MAHA movement, honestly. And everyone's really curious. Republicans are really curious how these two, MAGA and MAHA, are blending together. These two movements are blending together as one, actually in formal Washington, right? It's one thing to see it at a rally. It's another thing to see it actually in the halls of power, where these institutions have obviously been corrupted for a really long time, where this is very new territory for the Republican Party, and where people who believe very different things and have for a long time are now coming in and blending with the Republican Party. So this was a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I also enjoyed the Miller Lite, for what it's worth. Important to have Wisconsin beer anytime you're interviewing a politician from Wisconsin. They'll catch you if you're not. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Appreciate it. And we'll be back here with more Undercurrents soon.